Hey guys, welcome back to part 3 of my Paint.net graphic design tutorial series. Today we're going to be going over creative tools, which encompasses the last 11 out of 19 tools on the toolbar. We went over the first 8 tools in the second video. Today we're going to be going over the bottom half of the toolbar here from the paint bucket down. The first tool I'm going to be going over today is the paint bucket, also known as the fill tool. Uh, you can use this in tandem with things like the magic wand to really efficiently color big spaces that you want to be just a certain color. For example, when I selected the inside of this rectangle, I can just fill it with whatever color I want, or for the outline as well, I could just select that with the magic wand and fill that selected space perfectly with whatever color I want. So I'll just get a nice green and purple going there. You can access the color menu by going to the top right of your screen where the Tools, History, and Layers pop-up buttons are to enable and disable those windows, which honestly you should always have all of them up because they're super useful. Um, yeah, that is the paint bucket. Last thing with the paint bucket, actually, you can also right click, and when you right click with the paint bucket, I'll select the inside space for this. You can use your secondary color on your color palette down here, and that allows you to have two colors that you can fill with simultaneously. So that's pretty useful. In addition, you don't need to have anything selected to use the paint bucket. It'll still automatically detect colors and fill a certain area, but it'll go outside of the space you're trying to fill. And in this example, it bleeds out into the outline a little bit with each fill. So it just depends on what you're going for and if you care about that or not. But in most cases, you're going to want to maintain whatever outline or boundary you have between certain colors so that there is no overlap. Up next is the paintbrush tool, which is one of the most useful drawing tools in my opinion. I don't use it as much as I used to, but I still use it quite a bit, enough for it to be like one of the main tools in your arsenal. So with this drawing tool and with many others, there's a setting up here called hardness. And hardness just means like how dense the pixels are, like the pixel density of whatever you're drawing. So I'm just gonna draw different like little lines, all with different hardness levels so that you can see the difference between each of them. So the first one is gonna be 1% hardness. And I'm just gonna choose a new random color to test, maybe a nice, I don't know, orange color. There we go. So 1%, that's a line. We're gonna crank it up to 25% now. You can see it's getting a little darker. 50%. You can really tell that there's like more, just more pixels being laid down. More orange pixels. 75%, very dense, and then 100% is pretty much full color, and that's what I use most of the time, unless you want it to be a little bit like transparent or like foggy looking almost, like steam rising off a hot mug of coffee or something. But typically I just roll at 100% because that's the most reliable for getting the best looking colors. So now we have the pencil tool, which is pretty simple, self-explanatory. It is literally just a pencil. It draws a 1 pixel wide black line, and you can change it to different colors. I guess by default it's black, but you can have it be whatever you want. And it is just a 1 pixel line, regardless of color, and that is all there is to it. Yes. Next, we have the clone stamp tool, which is very situational, but also quite useful in a lot of ways. So for this example, I'm gonna have a few things that I use the clone stamp tool for, and I'm gonna explain those now. First, I'm gonna get rid of these black dots without using any paintbrush tool or anything or any fill tool to add color and get rid of those black dots and make it return to just being a solid color. Um, Also, I'm going to copy paste this whole blob of colors without using any selection or movement tools, just the clone stamp tool. So essentially, the clone stamp tool works by setting an anchor point, and that anchor point is what you will be essentially copy pasting in whatever direction you are moving and drawing in. It'll move that anchor point in in sync with your cursor and draw whatever is in the path of the anchor point. So, for example, if I set an anchor point on the teal here and move downward, it's going to trace that teal that it's already anchored on and get rid of the black because it's anchored on other teal coloring. So I can do the same over here on the purple. It's set on purple, so I can just use that purple to color over the black. Same on the blue. Just you have to do little swipes too, because if you go too far, your anchor point will hit some of that black that's there because it's in the path of the clone stamp tool, and it'll start drawing that black stuff because it's in the path of your anchor point, and you don't want that. So just make sure that you're like continuing to place new anchor points and making sure that the path is good for the anchor points. See, it can get a little weird sometimes. That's why it's pretty situational, but in some cases it's better to just use a paintbrush tool for stuff like this, but obviously for the purpose of the video, I'm just showing what can be done with the clone stamp tool. And as you can see here, we're getting most of it cleaned up, and now it's good. So now that I've gotten rid of all the black dots, I'm going to go about changing the brush width to from 4 to, let's say, 12, maybe even a little higher, 20. Yeah, that's better. And now I'm going to copy paste this whole like little rainbow of colors here, if you want to call it that, without using any selection or movement tools, just by setting an anchor point over here at the top half of this, and then I'll scan the bottom half in a second. And I'm just essentially going to swipe in a down to the right motion like this, so I'm covering all these colors in the path of the anchor point, and should work. You can also move up and adjust as you need to, because it's just going to be sensing what's already there in the path of the point. You might want to do another pass. You don't even have to replace your anchor point. You can, but I mean, it's just going to be in the path of what's already there because it moves in tandem with your cursor, which is nice. And boom, uh, I fully copied that whole set of colors just by using the clone stamp tool, in addition to getting rid of the imperfections that I placed. Pretty neat, but like I said, very situational tool. Now we have one of my favorite tools, the text tool, which is a staple for pretty much any person using graphic design programs like this. Um, in most situations, you're going to need to use text. Not all, obviously, but like even making this example and making the thumbnails for these videos, I use the text tool, and for many other applications as well. Um, it's just a very useful thing to have. Um, so the text tool has quite a few options that you can take advantage of. The first of which being font, which Paint.net in the newer versions now automatically detects which fonts you have installed on your system, and I'm pretty sure it'll just port them in, which is super nice. And you can do a lot with all these different fonts and make some cool looking things. You can even change the color of your text. So I'm just gonna put Mort in there just as so we have some text to mess around with. Um, right now it's black. I can go down to the color palette and change it to anything. We'll just make it like blue or something. Uh, so you can change the color of your text. You can change the font. You can change the size. Obviously, I'm gonna keep it where it was because having it bigger makes it easier to see. You have other options as well, such as like bold, italicized, uh, underline. You can even do strike through, strike out, but I mean, I don't know why you would want that unless you're really going for that look, which, I mean, hey, some people like that look. I respect it. You can also change how the text is rendered, which kind of changes how the pixels are displayed. I usually just keep it on smooth because that seems to work pretty well. That's a default option. There are also align settings, so if you have more than one word, you can change it to be aligned differently. So you can have it center aligned so it all stacks up well. You can have it aligned to the right. You can have it however you want. And the rest of these options, like, I don't really use them. You don't really need them. If you want to dabble around with those, I'm sure there are videos, but uh, just in a brief touch, like, those are really all the options that you're going to need to use with the text tool. So, moving on, uh, we have the gradient tool. And a gradient is essentially just a blend of two colors, which is going to be determined by the colors that you have selected down in your color palette. And you're going to want to select an area when making a gradient or just have an empty canvas because if you don't have an area selected when creating your gradient, then it's going to use the entire canvas to create your gradient. And you don't want that if you're already using a lot of the canvas. So I'm going to select the gradient tool and real quick, I'll go over the options and show them as I go. Um, you have the linear, which is the default gradient, which is what I use most. There is the linear reflected. I'll show all these as after I read them out. The diamond, the radial, the conical, which is essentially just like a rotational gradient, and a spiral clockwise and counterclockwise gradient, which are also slightly rotational, but a little different than the conical one. Starting with the linear gradient, you just drag from wherever you want. You could drag from the left, from the top, from the right, if you wanted, from the bottom, however you want. You could have it be diagonal, however you want your gradient. Uh, that's how you can have it, and it looks just fine no matter which way you decide to mess with it. Um, Lots of different uses, lots of different cool color combos out there. You should definitely mess around with it and see what you can cook up. Um, Next is the linear reflected, which is just a gradient branching out from a middle path. There's also the diamond, which is a bloom outward from a center point, which can look pretty cool. It's kind of like a star. The radial looks like a sun almost. It's just a circular bloom outward from a center point, but using the colors that you have selected. The conical is a rotational gradient. Like I said before, it kind of has this rotational fade to it. I don't really use that one very often, but some people might really like it. This is the spiral clockwise, and then the spiral counterclockwise is just the reversed variant of that. And I don't really use any of those very often. Just the first four are the most useful in my opinion. So that is the gradient tool. Enjoy messing around with that one because honestly, there is a lot of potential there. Next on the list is the eraser tool, which functions the same as the paintbrush tool and has the same settings, brush width and hardness, as the paintbrush tool, but it acts essentially in the opposite way, in that instead of creating pixels, it is removing and deleting pixels. And the hardness setting corresponds to how many pixels are being deleted, which I will showcase by deleting black pixels from this black rectangle down here. So at 1% hardness, it is removing a decent amount of the pixels. You can see that it's cutting right through them. 25% is doing even more, 50%, even brighter. You can see that more and more of the black pixels are being removed as the hardness goes up on the eraser because just like the paintbrush, as you're increasing the hardness and it's creating a denser swath of pixels, the eraser tool is deleting denser swaths of pixels. And the reason it's getting brighter in each one is because there aren't any leftover uh, see-through, less opaque black pixels hanging around due to the low hardness setting. So when you're deleting pixels or deleting anything with your eraser tool, it's usually a good rule of thumb to keep it at 100% so that you're getting all of the pixels that you intend to delete and there aren't any leftover pixels hanging out. Um, yeah. The color picker and recolor tools are next, with the color picker essentially just being a way of selecting colors that you've already used, and if they're on screen, and if you're on the same layer as them, as those specific pixels, then you can click on those pixels with the left click, and that color, your primary color in your color palette, will become the color of the pixel that you selected and clicked on. Or you can right click and your secondary color will become whatever color the pixel is that you selected with your color picker. And that's super useful. Um, so that's pretty basic. The recolor tool is kind of an odd tool. I don't use it very often, and it's really not that useful in my opinion. It's supposed to be used to recolor certain colors with the color that you have selected, but not recolor anything else, only the colors that you want to be recolored. It's super convoluted, and I honestly don't think it's very useful. It's got a brush width, hardness, and tolerance. You don't even really need the tolerance for this, just the hardness and the brush width. And to be honest, it's more of just like a decent like line drawing like paintbrush tool more than anything. And it's not too useful in my opinion, so I don't use it and I don't really recommend that anyone else does, but if you feel the need to recolor some stuff, feel free to look up any other guide on the recolor tool to see what it's actually capable of. I just think there are a lot of better options for getting around that. The next tool I'm going to be covering, the line tool, is one of my personal favorites and one that I use more than pretty much any other tool because this tool allows you to draw really straight lines or lines honestly uh, that just like go in any direction that you could possibly want. You can even have them rotate along a degree axis or be perfectly straight. You know, you can bend them. You can do pretty much whatever you need your lines to do. You know, and as opposed to just taking a paintbrush and freehanding some lines, if you're trying to draw an actual shape, you know, it's a lot easier to take a line tool and just put together four lines here that make a much better square than you could ever hope to just freehand. And sure, that was quick and I didn't line it up and I didn't really like take my time, but the line tool can be used just to do so many different things, and I honestly encourage everyone to use it to its fullest capability. And the more you use it, the more you'll learn about it and like how to, you know, efficiently bend it to your will. Pun intended. The last tool that I'm going to be covering in this video is the Shapes tool, and it's pretty straightforward in that you can essentially just draw a bunch of different shapes perfectly. There are a ton of different templates, basic shapes like rectangles slash squares. If you're holding shift with the rectangle, it makes a perfect rectangle, which is a square. Same with the ellipse tool with circles. Um, you can have rounded rectangles, diamonds, trapezoids, parallelograms, triangles, right triangles, stars, diamonds, arrows, thought bubbles, different, all kinds of different shapes. Um, I use this tool a ton. I think it's super useful for a lot of different things. Just like that box, instead of making a box like that, I could easily just draw a box, which right here, instead of drawing a box that's hollow with a color in the middle, up here in the options to the right of the shape type, there is an option where you can change whether or not it's just an outline, just the filled shape without the outline, or both the filled shape and the outline. So there it is, just the blue outline. Here it is, filled, just the filled shape. And here's the filled shape with the outline, which it almost seems to be bugging out a little bit, but it still works. And I'll leave that one right there for an example. And in addition to that, I guess I'll make another shape. We'll make an ellipse. You could also, here, I'll make a little person as an example to show what the shapes can really do to end this video off. We'll take the rectangle tool and I am going to make a dude. I'm going to make a man. So with the rectangle tool, I can, oh, I still have a place selected. That's why I couldn't make that shape. Lesson from the last video. Um, so I'm gonna make just a square head. We're just gonna draw a dude's face, and I can use the shapes tool and change it from rectangle to ellipse. And instead of having an outline and the shape, I'm just gonna change it to filled shape because I want to just have a black circle for the eye. I'm gonna do that twice, as close as I can. Those look about even, I would say. And if I want to have a mouth, I can take the line tool, for example, and just draw a line straight across, holding the shift key, and then just drag, both of these middle dots down to create a bend in the line. And suddenly, you've got yourself a guy. And if you even want to add a nose, you can do that too. Make the brush width a little smaller on the line tool, you know. Give him some nose, but not too much. And there you go. That's what you can do with the line and the shape tool, among all the other things that we've learned. I hope you guys took something away from this video. If there's anything that I can improve, just let me know. Uh, Thanks for your time. Have a good one.